Hello, it's me, Emma, from Read the World, and I'm back once more for my monthly installment of 3 Chinese novels from each decade of the 20th century. And so up next we have these 3 that I will now introduce to you. Woo. So we have Miss Sophie's Diary by Ling Ding, which is a female author. I'm really excited about that. Site translated by W.J.F. Jenner. That is a very fancy name. First edition, 1985. I think that's when this edition was published, because the foreword, no, the translator's note says that the first story in here was published in 1928. So, collection of short stories. Really excited to get into that. Even more short stories. I don't usually read a lot of short stories, which is probably bad because I do admire the craft of the short story very much. Up next, I have Border Town by Shen Kongwen. This is translated by Jeffrey C. Kinkley, who's also the author of The Odyssey of Shen Kongwen. So the translator really likes this guy. I'm excited about this one. It was first published in 1934, but hopefully, according to my research, took place in the 20s, I'm pretty sure. I did a lot of preparation in my list of books. It's supposed to partially take place in the 20s. And I'm really interested in this one because it's all about like rural China. There's just so much that takes place in Beijing in Chinese literature. But this one is in rural China. I'm excited about that one. And then, oh, look, these covers are very similar. I also have Rickshaw Boy. Oh, because they're both Harper Perennial Modern Chinese Classics. So they have very similar formatting on the covers. They're very pretty. I like it. So yeah, Border Town by Shen Kongwen. And then I have Rickshaw Boy by Lao Shi, translated by Howard Goldblatt. This was published in 1937, and it's about a rickpoller in Beijing. There we go. It is one of the most important and popular works of 20th century Chinese literature, with an unflinchingly honest, darkly comic look at a life on the margins of society and a searing indictment of the philosophy of individualism. Oh, okay. So that should be fun. I took a Chinese film class once where I watched a film about a rickshaw driver. And so then I'll read that one. Yeah. So that's the 3 volumes that I have. Not so bad. I don't have anything particularly intimidating in length this time around. So I will let you know how all that is going. I'm going to read Miss Sophie's Diary. Oh, look, I've already started it. I'm sorry. I started without you. And so I will let you know how that is going right now. Okay, I have read the first story in Miss Sophie's Diary and Other Stories by Ling Ding. And this first story was Miss Sophie's Diary, which is just a bunch of diary entries of a girl in Beijing who's in love with a very beautiful man, and that infuriates her. And it is so funny. Oh my gosh. This story was written in 1927, 1928. She's so relatable. So she's crazy about this guy and talking an awful lot about her feelings for him, and it's awesome. She says, "It's as if I were involved in a struggle with something I want but won't go after. I must find a way of making him give it himself. Yes, I understand myself. I'm only a completely female woman. Women devote all their thoughts to the men they want to conquer. I want to possess him. I want him to give his heart unconditionally and kneel before me, begging me to kiss him. I've gone completely mad. I just keep thinking over and over again of the tricks and methods I'm going to use. I've gone right off my head." And then later, when she's describing like what it is to be in love, I think, "Is this love? Perhaps only love can have such magic power. Why else should someone's thinking be so transformed and incalculable? When I went to sleep, I despised that pretty boy, but the moment I woke up and opened my eyes, I was thinking of that Philistine and wondering if he'd be coming along today, and when. early in the morning, this afternoon, in the evening. And I jumped out of bed, washed my face in a great hurry, made the bed, picked up the big book that was dropped on the floor last night, and kept rubbing its edges. I have such a beautiful dream that Ling Zhi gave me, but he's also ruined it. It's only because of him that I can drink the pure wine of youth to the full and spend the morning in the smile of love. But it's also because of him that I've come to understand this thing called life, been disappointed, wanted to die, and so detested my own willingness to fall that to the punishment, that the punishment I brought on myself has seemed the lightest possible. Truly, sometimes I've even wondered if I'd have the strength to kill someone to preserve what I love. And then later, this one I think is probably my favorite portion in the entire story. Ling Zhi hasn't been here for several days. Of course, I don't know how to dress. I'm useless at social behavior. I'm no good at household management. I've got TB and I'm broke. So what would he want to come here for? I didn't want him to come, but when he stayed away, it made me feel more miserable than ever, and was even more proof of his earlier frivolity. And then later, when brilliant women are feeling a bit miserable, they can write lots of classical or modern poems about their grief and emotion in quotes, or the sorrows of the heart. But I'm useless. I'm in this poetic situation, but I can't make anything of it. I can't even use tears as an alternative to poetry to express my emotional turmoil. For this reason alone, I ought to drop everything and live for all I'm worth, if I'm not to fall behind others. Or at the very least, I ought to be able to use a pen or a gun for my own amusement and the admiration of a crowd of shallow eyes. Really, I've dropped myself in a misery that's worse than death, and all just for that man's soft hair and red lips. And this is close to the very end of the story. This diary is less a record of Sophie's life than simply every one of those tears. Only they seem true to her, but this diary is now coming to an end because Sophie no longer needs to give vent to her resentment and find consolation through tears. This is because I feel that everything is meaningless, and that tears are the profoundest expression of this meaninglessness. On the last page of this diary, Sophie should happily celebrate finding satisfaction in the depths of her despair, satisfaction that ought to kill her with happiness. Yet all I find in this satisfaction is a sense of victory, a victory in which I find desolation and an even deeper sense of how pathetic and ridiculous I am. So the beauty I've been dreaming about so obsessively for months, that tall man's elegance, has now faded far away. I just think she's such a mood. Like I've also felt like an insane person, chasing after stupid people, and just I love being able to connect to the emotions of a woman 100 years ago who went through the exact same stuff that I've been through as well. Hello, I finished Miss Sophie's Diary and Other Stories. It was fantastic. I am giving it 4 stars. Sophie's Diary, the first story, was definitely my favorite. Adorable, hilarious, relatable. The rest of the stories were all, like, a lot of them, those were also very good. There was a lot about communism. There's a story about a couple who ends up, like a 2 lovers who are ripped apart because the man stops hanging out with the woman so much because he's going to too many communist meetings, which sounds funny, but it's very sad that she's like, you just don't care about me anymore. And he's like, but you don't care about the cause. And like, it's just, it's very romantic and dramatic and also very funny. And then there's a story about like a landlord's daughter who like runs away to join the Communist Party. I think like, there were some other communist themes as well. But then there's also just general themes of depicting poverty and hardship, rural living, and there was definitely a sense of humor in a lot of the other stories as well. Just really delightful. I enjoyed it so much. I thought that the writing was just so clever, and I had a really great time. And I don't, like, short story collections are tough. It's hard to get a good, solid short story collection that keeps you engaged the whole time. I am giving it 4 stars just because I liked Miss Sophie's Diary, the first one, so much, and none of the other stories really got me the way that one did. I still did really enjoy them, and this is not a common book to find, but I think that if you like Chinese history, if you like classics, this has just the delightful, timeless tone of young women navigating social challenges at another time and place in history. So yeah, love the voice, love the writing style, love the subject matter that it tackled. Just a fun time. Okay, I'm a little more than halfway through Rickshaw Boy. What do I say? What do I say about the boy with the rickshaw? The boy who pulls the rickshaw. the rickshaw puller, the rickshaw boy. It's about a young man in poverty and how he keeps trying to pull himself up and own his own rickshaw and be stable, and how he keeps failing at that because the whole world is set against poor people and he's just set up to fail by the system. I thought it was really interesting that the introduction said that Lao She was heavily influenced by Charles Dickens. He went and studied, like, I think he was a professor in the UK and read a lot of Dickens and was really struck by how Dickens showcased the lives of the poor, and that heavily influenced Rickshaw Boy. And that's so interesting because Lu Xun, who wrote The Real Story of Ah Q, was also inspired by Charles Dickens. It sounds like Dickens got translated into Chinese at some point around the turn of the century and had a big impact on a lot of writers. And I think that's so fascinating. I can definitely see, okay, I haven't read any Dickens, but if you're just going to talk about poor people, then I totally understand how this has a Dickens influence because it just has these very vivid, sympathetic scenes of the life of the poor and the downtrodden. It's very discouraging. The rickshaw boy, whose name is Xiangzi? I don't know about that one. Xiangzi, the rickshaw boy, is an imperfect character. I really feel for him because he's working so hard, he's trying his best and still isn't getting ahead. But, you know, all getting set back again and again and again is like filling him with internal rage. And he's just, you know, he's not exactly a lovely person. He's a hard worker. He's generally pretty respectful, but he's getting really discouraged, as I would too. I think what I have found the most compelling so far is I can picture everything so well in my head. Everything is so vivid in this story. I love being taken into that world of the impoverished in early 20th century China. I'm not, okay, listen. Once again, this is actually from the decade that it's supposed to be? It's hard to say. It was published in 1937. I don't think it takes place in the late 30s because it's not talking about the Second Sino-Japanese War. It is talking about conflict, but I suspect it is like warlord infighting, I think, is my impression so far. When I was looking online for books about China in the 20s, this came up a couple of times. I haven't found any evidence that that doesn't take place in the 20s. I'll let you know. I'll let you know how that goes. Hello. I finished Rickshaw Boy. It ended in about the way that I expected it to. It was really bleak and depressing, and things just kept getting worse. Everything that could have gone wrong did for our main character. He was tricked into marrying a woman who wasn't actually that bad. He just resented her for tricking her. And she thought that her father had like some money and she thought she was going to get some money, but then he disowned her. So they didn't get any money. And then they almost had a baby, but then the baby died in childbirth. And so then he went to make more money on with his rickshaw so that he could marry this girl next door that he had kind of fallen for while his wife was still alive. But when he came back for her after he'd made some money, he found out that she had killed herself in a brothel. And he just became more and more bitter and resentful and vicious and unhappy. And did he die at the end? It was just bad. But I will say, beautifully written, very vivid portrayal of intense poverty. And because of that subject matter, I think it's a timeless kind of story of just, there is a level of poverty that it is impossible to get out of by yourself with like no help from anyone else. He wasn't able to get out, even though he worked so hard. He did everything that he could and was still punished for it. Like, still saw zero returns, and things just got worse and worse and worse. You can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps. He lived in the country and his parents died and he went to the city to make his fortune, and once he got a rickshaw of his own, it was taken away from him and he was never really able to recover from that ever. And then he just lived in misery for the rest of his life and was never able to get any kind of leg up ever. Heavy stuff, man. Ooh. And then, because they were both due to back to the library, I read all of Border Town in one go, very short. It's like less than 200 pages. It was so lovely. It was just, it had the vibes of like a Ghibli movie if a Studio Ghibli movie didn't have any magic in it. If it was just countryside whimsical vibes. But also at the end, two major characters just randomly died tragic deaths, and that was sad. But the introduction talked about how it's a very like Taoist story. Like it's sad that these people died and like the characters are affected by it, but throughout the story, like before these deaths, there's just kind of this attitude of talking about fate, but talking about fate not in like a cheesy way of like this was meant to happen, and more of just like we don't have any like this was going to happen. We don't have any control over it. It was fate, and so we just have to accept it, which is very Taoist, just accepting what you cannot control and making the best of things regardless. There's also other things about Taoism. I haven't studied Taoism in a long time. I should. Taoism is really cool. I appreciate Taoism. So it's about a young girl growing up in a countryside town on a provincial border. I thought it was going to be like a national border and that it was going to have something to do with like ethnic identity or anything if there's people who are Chinese and like across a national border into a different culture. But no, it's like provincial borders. So there's just like a lot of kind of like commerce going back and forth and interactions. And it's about how there are two brothers in town, like from a wealthy family, who fall in love with her and want to marry her when she's like 13 or 14 years old. She is being raised by her grandfather, and they adore each other, and their relationship is very sweet. But yeah, so her and her grandfather's relationship, a little bit of the drama of what these boys are trying to do to figure out who's going to marry her, and then a little bit of tragedy at the end, and just this soft, quiet story that's a little bit sad, but also all about kind of accepting like these things happen and we just deal with them in a beautiful, peaceful country setting. Apparently this one was banned in China for a while, like under Mao, because even though it takes place in the countryside, which is supposed to be like the foundation of the proletariat uprising, it doesn't focus on class warfare at all. It's just countryside people, like, and it doesn't portray these hardworking countryside people as like miserable and oppressed by capitalism, unlike Rickshaw Boy. So they were like, this isn't communist enough. Like you portray these poor countryside people as too happy. They don't struggle enough and they're not struggling against the bourgeoisie. So it was banned for a while. But I think it's very lovely. It's very short. I recommend this one. I enjoyed it. It was lovely. So yeah, that was my 1920s reading adventures. I think it's interesting that we're starting to see these communist ideals, right? Like Miss Sophie's Diary, promoting all of these communist stories, all these like, characters working in the communist resistance, Rickshaw Boy being very anti-capitalist, and then Border Town idealizing the countryside. There's a lot of stuff kind of gearing up for Maoism. A lot of like I can really see those ideas spinning around. If these were the pretty much the only, I think there was maybe one or two other books I could have picked, but like these were the main books that I could find that took place in this era and really fitting ideas that were very relevant for the time period, unsurprisingly. So it's kind of cool to see those thought processes starting to form and to take place. So up next is the 1930s. This is where stuff gets real, because this is when horrific war comes into play with the Second Sino-Japanese War. So stay tuned for that one. Thanks so much for watching along as I read 1920s Chinese literature. All right. See you next time.